Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this off-script episode of Unbound, the show where we explore the hidden maps of our minds and the uncharted territories of human experience. Just kidding. It's just off-script where I ramble about whatever's on my mind. And this time of year, I like to get real psychological about shit. I'm your host, Beth. And today I am talking about a concept that once you hear it will change how you see yourself, your reactions, and pretty much everyone around you. It's arguably one of the most important psychological ideas you've never explicitly heard of, and it's called the window of tolerance. So let me set a scene for you. Imagine that it's Tuesday. You slept great, you had a decent breakfast, and your coffee was exactly the right temperature. And you get to work, and someone cuts you off in traffic, and you shrug it off. And your boss emails you about a quick chat, and you think, okay, let's see what they need. And a coworker forgets something important, and you calmly help them fix it. You know, you're navigating the day, handling the bumps, and feeling capable. Now, imagine it's Wednesday. You barely slept. The dog woke you up early. You spilled coffee on your shirt and traffic was a nightmare. The same person cuts you off. You're suddenly gripping the wheel. Your heart is pounding. You're muttering under your breath. The boss's email pops up and your stomach drops. A quick chat. Your mind immediately races to worst case scenarios. And when that coworker makes the same mistake, you snap. A sharp tone, maybe an eye roll. Even a sigh that could deflate a hot air balloon. What's the difference between Tuesday and Wednesday? Is it just your mood? Are you suddenly a bad person? No. What changed was the size of your window of tolerance. So if you think of your window of tolerance like the operating zone for your internal system, it's kind of that sweet spot where you can effectively manage life's ups and downs, right? So in this zone, you're alert and you're engaged and you can think clearly and you can feel your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. And you can actually connect with other people. You're not necessarily happy every second, but you're resilient. You're regulated. But what happens when life or lack of sleep or chronic stress or even just a bad day spills you right out of that window? You either go up or you go down. So let's talk about the up first. So this is what we call hyperarousal. So if you think of it as your nervous system kind of hitting the accelerator, it's classic fight or flight, right? So when you're in hyperarousal, you might feel anxious or panicked or incredibly irritable, and every little thing grates on your nerves, and you might find yourself lashing out or feeling agitated or unable to sit still. And your thoughts are racing and you feel a sense of urgency or danger, even when there isn't one, right? And that's your body screaming, danger, react. It's a survival mechanism. But in the modern world, it often gets triggered by a late email or a long line at the grocery store. And then there's down. This is hypoarousal. So here your nervous system slams on the brakes. This is the freeze response. So when you're in hypoarousal, you might experience numbness or a sense of emptiness. You might feel detached, like you're watching a movie of your own life rather than living it. You might feel a profound lack of energy, or you might feel spaced out and foggy and kind of disconnected from everything. And this is your body saying, it's too much. Shut down, conserve energy. It's an ancient survival tactic that can leave us kind of feeling stuck and unable to engage with our lives. So the crucial insight here is that neither hyperarousal nor hypoarousal is a flaw in your character, right? They're physiological responses, and that's it. It's just your nervous system trying to cope when it's pushed beyond its current capacity. So it's not about being too sensitive or lazy. It's more about your internal operating system going offline. Make sense? Our individual window sizes are shaped by our life experiences. So chronic stress or overwhelming events or unresolved past experiences can kind of shrink that window and make us more susceptible to being pushed into those red or blue zones, right? Someone with a smaller window might react intensely to something another person can easily shrug off. And not because they're weak, but because their nervous system has a hell of a lot less wiggle room, right? So where it gets really personal for me, I want to talk about something I've struggled to explain to people my entire life. I am an introvert, and I don't mean that in the trendy, oh, I like staying home sometimes way. I mean that social interaction, even wonderful social interaction with people I absolutely adore, drains the shit out of my nervous system's battery in a very real and physiological way. And what I've learned about myself, I can actually see the patterns now. I know when my window is shrinking, and I know when I'm approaching the edge. It's kind of like having an internal dashboard or something, with the warning lights that start flickering before the engine overheats. Maybe I've had like 3 social commitments in a row, or work's been particularly demanding, or I've had too many meetings, or I've been responding to texts and calls and requests all week without a break. I start to notice the signs. My responses get shorter and my smile feels like it requires more effort. And I find myself kind of zoning out mid-conversation, even with people I care about deeply. And this is where it gets tricky, because when I recognize these patterns, when I see that my window is narrowing to the point where I know I'm going to be irritable or checked out or just not myself, I do something that confuses the hell out of people. And I pull back. I withdraw. I create boundaries. I cancel plans. I don't respond to texts right away. I say no to invitations. And unfortunately, people take it personally. They think I'm being a bitch, or they think I'm choosing other things over them or other people over them. They might think I'm flaky or that I don't give a shit. But what they don't understand, what they can't see, is that I'm doing this pretty much for all of us. I'm not withdrawing because I don't want to be around them. I'm withdrawing because I want to be my best self when I am around them. So I'll just paint you a quick picture of what happens when I don't honor these patterns. So a few years ago, I had a friend who kept inviting me to these group dinners. Lovely person, great intentions, but these dinners were always on Friday nights after I had a week full of work and just being on for people all the time. And, they were always big groups, like 8 or 10 people in loud ass restaurants where you had to shout over the music and the clatter of dishes. And I kept saying yes because I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want her to think that I didn't value our friendship. So I dragged myself out there, already running on fumes, my window already narrowed to the width of a frickin' thread. And invariably, I'd end up either completely shut down at the table, contributing jack shit, just sort of staring at my plate while conversation swirled around me, or I'd get snappy. Someone would make a joke at my expense, and instead of laughing it off, I'd bite back with something sharp, and I just wasn't fun to be around. And then I'd feel like shit, which would make everything worse. So after one particularly rough dinner where I could barely keep my eyes open and I left early claiming a headache, which wasn't a lie, I had to have an honest conversation with her. And I explained that it wasn't about her. It wasn't about the group. It wasn't even about the dinners themselves. It was just the timing. It was about capacity and my nervous system literally needing time to reset. And you know what? She didn't get it. She heard it as rejection, and she heard it as me prioritizing my alone time over our friendship. The invitation stopped, the friendship cooled, and that hurt. But, what I know now that I didn't know then, I can't make everyone understand my internal experience, right? I can explain it. I can be as clear as possible, but some people will still interpret my boundaries as rejection, and that's not my burden to carry. Because the alternative, showing up when I'm outside my window, when I'm either buzzing with anxious energy or completely shut down and disconnected, that doesn't serve anybody. That's not real connection. That's just me performing the idea of connection while internally I'm falling the fuck apart, So being an introvert doesn't mean I don't like people. It means that people, even wonderful people, cost me energy in a way that's different from how they cost extroverts energy. So extroverts recharge through social interaction. I recharge through solitude. It's not better or worse. It's just different wiring. And when I don't honor that wiring, my window of tolerance shrinks dramatically. I've started thinking of it like this. So imagine your nervous system as a bank account, and every interaction, every conversation, every smile you give, every moment of eye contact, every bit of small talk, it's a withdrawal. So for introverts, we're making a lot of withdrawals throughout the day, and we need deposits. And those deposits come from quiet, from solitude, from activities that don't require us to be on for anyone else. Reading, walking alone, sitting with a cup of tea, just existing without having to manage anyone else's emotional state or expectations. When I don't make those deposits, when I keep making withdrawals, my account goes into overdraft. And that's when I fall out of my window. That's when I become crusty and snappy and hyper-aroused and defensive, or I completely shut down. Hyper-aroused and numb and just trying to survive until I can be alone again. So I've learned to force boundaries even when it's uncomfortable, even when people don't understand. I've learned to say, I need this weekend to myself without over-explaining or apologizing. I've taught people, don't show up at my house unannounced because I need time to prepare. It's not personal at all. I've learned to recognize the signs early. Like I can feel it in my body now. There's this specific sensation, almost like my skin is too tight or something, or like there's kind of a low level buzz of static underneath everything I do. And that's my signal. That's my nervous system saying, hey, we're approaching capacity here. Time to create some space, right? And when I honor that signal and when I create the space I need before I hit the edge of my window, magic happens. I can show up for the people I love with genuine presence, and I can engage in conversations without that feeling of desperate exhaustion lurking underneath. I can be spontaneous and playful and fully there, and my window widens again and the capacity returns. But it requires me to be what some people perceive as selfish. It requires me to disappoint people sometimes. It requires me to be okay with people not understanding. And that's been one of the hardest lessons of my life, honestly, because I'm a people pleaser by nature. I want everyone to be happy. I love peace. I want to be liked. I don't care if I'm not, but I would like to be. I mean, who doesn't, right? Who wants to be hated? Nobody. But I've had to learn that being liked by people who don't understand my needs is actually fulfilling. It's not fulfilling. It's exhausting. So that's another layer to this that I need to talk about because it's been a particular thorn in my side. I work from home. I kind of run my own business. I actually have several projects at once, and I don't have a traditional 9 to 5 that requires me to leave my house. And there are some people in my life who assume that because I'm home all day, my life must be exactly like theirs. So if they're at home all day doing nothing because that's what their life looks like, they project that onto me. They assume I'm also doing nothing. Never mind that I've told them multiple times about the projects I'm working on or the deadlines I'm juggling or the clients I'm managing. Never mind that I work weekends sometimes or that I'm on calls or that I'm deep in creative work that requires this intense focus, right? Like somehow that information just doesn't stick. Or maybe they hear it, but they don't really listen. Or maybe they just don't believe that what I do counts as real work because it doesn't happen in an office. And this is where it gets really frustrating. They act like their lack of stimulation throughout the day is my responsibility to fix. I'll get texts at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Hey, what are you up to? Want to hang out? Or I'm so bored. Can you talk? And when I say I'm working or I'm in the middle of something, there's this, I don't even know what to call it. It's like dismissiveness or something like, oh, come on, you can take a break. As if my time is somehow less valuable because I'm not clocking in and out of a physical office. Or they'll call me knowing I work from home and launch into this big long story about their day or their drama or whatever's on their mind without even asking if now is a good time. And if I try to gently redirect, if I say, hey, I'm actually on a deadline right now, can we catch up later? There's this edge of resentment, like I've somehow failed them. Like I'm choosing work over them or like I'm being cold or unavailable. And the thing is, these are the same people who would never dream of calling someone in a traditional office job at 2 p.m. and expecting them to drop everything for a casual chat, right? They wouldn't text someone in a meeting and get upset when they don't respond immediately. But because I'm home, because my work doesn't look like their idea of work, suddenly all bets are off. My boundaries aren't real boundaries. My time isn't real time. And this stuff absolutely shrinks my window of tolerance because now I'm not just managing my workload and my energy as an introvert, I'm also managing other people's expectations and their feelings about my unavailability. I'm fielding guilt trips and passive-aggressive comments. I'm explaining over and over that, yes, I'm home, but no, I'm not available. And that emotional labor, that constant defending of my reality is friggin' exhausting. I had this one person in my life who would consistently do this every single week, multiple times a week. They'd reach out during my work hours and I'd explain, I'm working right now. And they'd say, oh, I know, I just need 5 minutes. But it was never 5 minutes. It was half an hour. It was 45 minutes, sometimes longer. And if I tried to end the conversation, there was this guilt trip. I guess you're too busy for me, or must be nice to have so much going on. These little jabs that made me feel like a terrible person for having boundaries when they lack respect. And what they couldn't see or wouldn't see was that their interruptions weren't happening in a vacuum. I'd already been working for hours, making decisions, solving problems, being creative, responding, whatever. My nervous system was already depleted. And then to have someone act like my work doesn't matter or like my time is theirs for the taking, it would push me right into this hyper arousal. And I'd feel this spike of anger and this defensiveness and this desperate need to make them understand. Or sometimes I'd swing the other way into hypoarousal, just going numb and disconnected because it felt easier than fighting to be seen and heard. So eventually I had to have a really direct conversation. And I said, look, I need you to understand that just because I work from home doesn't mean I'm available all the livelong day. My work is real. My schedule is real. And when you reach out to me during my work hours and expect me to drop everything, it puts me in an impossible position. Either I sacrifice my work, which isn't fair to me, or I say no to you and then deal with you being upset, which also isn't fair to me. And you know what happened? They got defensive, of course. They said I was being dramatic and that they were just trying to connect and that I was acting like I was more important than I was. And, that's when I realized something crucial. This wasn't about me at all. This was about their inability to respect a reality that didn't match their own. Right? They were home and bored. So everyone else who was home must also be available for entertainment. My actual life, my actual work, my actual needs, none of that mattered because it didn't fit their narrative. And that's when I really had to lean into forcing boundaries. Consequences, all of it. I stopped answering during work hours, period. I'd see the texts, I'd see the calls, and I'd have to let them go. And then I'd respond later in the evening or whenever I was actually available with something like, hey, I was working earlier, what's up? No apology, no over explanation, just a simple statement of fact. And yes, there was fallout. There were hurt feelings, there were accusations that I changed, that I was distant, that I didn't care anymore. But what I know now, those accusations were never really about me. They were about someone else's discomfort with my boundaries. They were about someone else not getting what they wanted when they wanted it. And that's not my problem to solve. Because the truth is, if I had kept prioritizing their boredom over my actual life and over my work and over my capacity, I would have been living outside my window of tolerance constantly. I would have been resentful and angry and depleted, and I would have been unable to do my actual work well. And ironically, I would have had even less to offer them when we did connect because I'd be running on empty. So by forcing those boundaries and refusing to take responsibility for their lack of stimulation, I was actually protecting my ability to show up as a whole entire ass person, not just for them, but for everyone in my life, including myself. And I think this is something that a lot of people who work from home, or who have non-traditional schedules deal with. There's this assumption from others that flexible time means available time, that working from home means not really working. I mean, maybe for some people that's true, but not the case for me or many other people. Or that if you're physically present in your space, you should be emotionally and mentally present for anyone who wants a piece of you. But that's not how any of this works. Your window doesn't care when where you're physically located. It cares about your capacity, right? It cares about how much energy you've expended and how much you have left. And for introverts especially, every interaction is a withdrawal from that account, even the casual ones, even the ones that other people think are no biggie. So I've had to get really comfortable with people not understanding my life. I've had to get comfortable with people thinking I'm exaggerating or being dramatic or just making excuses, because the alternative is sacrificing my own well-being, my own work, my own nervous system regulation, just to fit into someone else's idea of what my life should look like. And you know what? I did that for so long. And, people saw me doing that for so long that they justifiably saw a change in me when I decided enough is enough. I can't do this anymore. So they want to blame me because I'm actually putting boundaries in place. There's this one quote that I love. I can't remember who said it, but it's something like, you can be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, and there will be someone who doesn't like peaches. And I think about that a lot when I'm setting boundaries. Some people aren't going to like that I need space. Some people are going to interpret my introversion as coldness or my boundaries as rejection. Some people are going to assume my life is easier than it is just because it doesn't look like theirs. And that's okay. Those aren't my people. My people are the ones who get it, or at least respect it, even if they don't fully understand it. I have this one friend, I'll call her Sarah. She is an extreme extrovert, like off the charts extroverted. She thrives in crowds. She gets energy from social interaction. She's the person who wants to turn a coffee date into an all-day affair. And for years, we had this push-pull dynamic where she'd want more from me than I could give, and I'd feel guilty and overwhelmed, and she'd feel rejected and blah, blah, blah. But we had this breakthrough conversation one night where I finally explained the window of tolerance to her, and I explained my patterns and kind of what happens in my nervous system when I'm over-socialized. And she said something that changed everything. She said, "So when you cancel on me or say you need space, you're actually protecting our friendship?" My mind, like I said, yes, exactly, yes. I'm protecting my ability to show up as the friend you deserve. I'm protecting the quality of our time together. I'm making sure that when I'm with you, I'm really with you and not just tolerating you while internally screaming for solitude. And she got it. She actually got it. So now when I say I need a few days to myself, she doesn't take it personally. She just says, "Okay, let me know when you're recharged." And our friendship is so much stronger because of it, because there's no resentment on either side. She's not feeling rejected and I'm not feeling drained or guilty. So if our goal is to live more effectively and build more resilience, our mission isn't just to know about the window, but to learn how to widen it and how to return to it when we drift out. And for those of us who are introverts, part of widening that window is actually honoring our need for solitude before we hit empty. It's basically preventative maintenance, right? And part of it is refusing to take responsibility for other people's assumptions about our lives. The most important step, and I want you to remember this phrase, is name it to tame it. So before you can do anything, you have to notice you're leaving the window. Are your thoughts racing? Is your jaw clenched? That's your sign of hyperarousal. If you suddenly feel drained or distant or foggy, that's your sign of hypoarousal. So just naming it, "I think I'm heading out of my window," creates a tiny bit of space between you and the reaction, and it shifts the activity in your brain from the emotional center back to the logical center. For me, I've added another layer to this. I name not just when I'm leaving the window, but when I'm approaching the edge. So when I notice that tightness in my skin that I talked about earlier, that static buzz, that kind of subtle pulling away from interactions, I name it. My introvert battery is low. I'm approaching the edge of my window, and that gives me permission to act before I'm in crisis mode. It's like seeing storm clouds on the horizon instead of waiting until you're already drenched, right? Once you've identified where you are, you need a toolkit to get back in. So I'm just going to quickly break down the return tickets for each zone, okay? So if you find yourself in the red zone, which is hyperarousal, your body's full of all this excess energy, you might be vibrating, you need to discharge it, okay? So try heavy work. Stand up and push against a wall with all your might for 10 seconds. It's that simple. Or try a muscle reset. So tense every single muscle in your body into a tight ball and just hold it for 5 seconds and then release it. This signals to your nervous system that the fight energy has been utilized and it can start to kind of dial it down. Another tool for the red zone is the 4-8 breath. So you inhale for a count of 4 and exhale slowly for a count of 8. So whenever you make that exhale longer than the inhale, it hits these kind of gentle brakes on your system, the vagus nerve is like, okay. So if you're really spiraling, use cold water, splash it on your face, the back of your neck or whatever. That just naturally lowers your heart rate. And I want to tell you about a time I used this in real life. So I was at a family gathering, one of those big holiday things where everyone's talking at once. There's music playing and there's kids running around and someone's always asking you questions. I had already been there for 3 hours, which was probably 2 hours past my limit, but I was trying to stick it out and I could feel myself getting snappy and my shoulders creeping up towards my ears and this edge in my voice when people talk to me, classic hyperarousal, right? So I just excused myself to the bathroom and I locked the door and I did the muscle reset and I tensed everything and I held it and I released. And then I ran cold water over my wrists and I splashed some on my face and I did the 4-8 breath for 2 minutes and I could feel it working, just like that. That urgency, that fight or flip panic of I need to get the hell out of here now, dialed down to something manageable. I could make it another 30 minutes and say my goodbyes gracefully and leave without freaking out at anyone, causing a scene, whatever. It saved me from ruining relationships that day for sure. If you're in the blue zone, that hypoarousal, your body feels heavy and stuck. You don't want to calm down. That's not the goal. You need to gently wake up. So try sensory shocks, hold an ice cube in your hand until you really feel the cold, or smell something sharp like peppermint or citrus. You can also use rhythmic movement. So if you tap your feet or you sway side to side or just go for a brisk walk, you're trying to signal your body that it's safe to come back online. If you feel completely detached, though, use an external focus exercise. Many of you have heard of this. You just look around the room and you name 5 red things, or you listen closely and name 5 distinct sounds you can hear. This pulls you out of the fog and back into the present moment. If you're alone and feeling small, you can try a butterfly hug. You just wrap your arms around yourself and firmly rub your arms. Feeling the physical boundaries of your body can be incredibly grounding. Hypoarousal, that zone, is trickier for me to recognize sometimes because it can feel so subtle. It's not dramatic like panic or anger. It's just kind of this quiet disappearing act. It happened to me on Christmas Eve. I'll be in a conversation and realize I haven't actually heard anything the other person has said for like the last 2 minutes, or I'll be driving and suddenly realize I don't remember the last 5 miles. It's that foggy kind of disconnected feeling. What I've learned is that hypoarousal for me as an introvert often happens when I've been over-socialized for too long and my nervous system has just given the fuck up. It's moved past the anxious, irritable phase and straight the hell into shutdown. I remember being at some sort of a conference once and there was like all kinds of shit going on, and this was eons ago, like way, way long time ago, like before I even became a mom. And there was like all kinds of stuff going on. And by day 4, I was just like completely gone. People would talk to me and I'd nod and smile, but nothing was landing. And I kind of felt like a ghost in my own body, right? So I ended up skipping that, the evening event on day 4. And I went back to my room and I just laid on the floor, not sleeping, just lying there on this dirty concrete-ish with a thin carpet on it floor. And slowly I started using some of these tools. I put on music with a strong beat and just kind of tapped my feet to it. And I got up and did some jumping jacks, as ridiculous as that felt. I opened the window and cold air hit my face, and gradually and slowly I came back online. The fog lifted and I felt human again. Something else I've discovered about the relationship between introversion and the window of tolerance is that they feed into each other. So when I'm regularly honoring my need for solitude, my window is wider and I can handle more social interaction before I start to dysregulate. So there's that. But when I've been pushing through and ignoring the signals and forcing myself to be social, when my tank is empty, my window shrinks. Suddenly, everything feels like too much. A simple text message feels overwhelming, and a 5-minute phone call feels like climbing a mountain. So the preventative work, the boundary setting and the saying no and the creating space, all of that isn't just about avoiding discomfort. It's actually about maintaining the size of my window, right? It's about making sure I have the capacity to show up for my life and the people I care about. It's strategic. It's not selfish. And I think this is true for everyone, not just introverts. We all have things that drain our windows and things that replenish them. And the key is knowing what those things are for you and being willing to prioritize them, even when it's socially awkward or when people don't understand. Maybe for you, it's not about needing solitude. Maybe your window shrinks when you don't move your body, or when you skip meals, or when you don't get enough creative time, or when you go too long without deep conversation. Whatever it is, you have to become a detective of your own nervous system, and you have to learn the patterns and recognize the warning signs and be willing to act on them. The key to all of this isn't perfection. It's about practice and self-compassion, right? You will fall out of your window. We all do. The goal is simply to shorten the time that you spend outside of it. Each time you notice it and you use a tool to return, you're actually subtly widening your window. You're building a bigger container for your life. Bit like training a muscle, right? The more you practice recognizing these states, the more flexible your nervous system becomes, and the wider your window, the more of life's challenges you can navigate with clarity and presence, right? And the beautiful thing about it, when you start honoring your patterns and stop apologizing for your boundaries, and when you start trusting your internal signals, you give other people permission to do the same. You model what it looks like to take care of your nervous system, and you show them that it's okay to prioritize regulation over people-pleasing. I've had people in my life tell me that watching me set boundaries gave them permission to set their own. That seeing me say no to things, even good things, because I didn't have the capacity, helped them realize that they could do the same. And that's one of the most rewarding parts of this work. It ripples out and your self-awareness becomes a gift to other people. So the next time you feel yourself kind of revving too high or shutting down too low, just remember your window of tolerance and give yourself a moment. Name what's happening and then choose a tool that I just told you to kind of guide you back home. And if you're recognizing the patterns before you hit the edge, if you're seeing the signs that your window is narrowing, honor that, create the space and set the boundary, protect your capacity. Even if people don't understand or it's uncomfortable, because the more we understand these invisible lines, the more freedom we create for ourselves to truly live. And for my fellow introverts out there, for anyone who's ever felt guilty about needing space or been called selfish for protecting their energy, for anyone whose work or life doesn't fit the traditional mold and has to deal with other people's assumptions about what that means, I want you to hear this. Your need for solitude is not a flaw, and it's not your damn problem. Your boundaries are not rejection. Your patterns are not problems to solve. They're information. That's it. They're your nervous system communicating with you. And when you honor that communication and you trust yourself enough to act on it, you're not choosing yourself over others. You're choosing to be your best self for others. You're choosing quality over quantity. You're choosing authentic presence over exhausting performance. That's it. I think I've said everything I need to say about this. So I'm going to let you go now. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit authorbethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.